Hello, this is Estelle from Estelle Baylis Design. I recently finished a project in After Effects whereby I needed to create a Newton's Cradle, and I knew that I would be using Motion Boutique's Newton to do this. It's the best package out there for creating that sort of animation. However, I couldn't find any tutorials online. The only thing that I could find was a free Newton's Cradle setup that Motion Boutique actually provide on their site. However, when I did download it, wasn't really what I was after. So I decided to recreate it myself. So it's a nice way of obviously being able to share this tutorial. Giving back to the animation community and all that. I've certainly used a lot of tutorials, especially on the Motion Boutique site, that are provided for free. So I'm sort of glad I can really give back, and hope you all enjoy the tutorial. Before we jump into After Effects, I thought I would just give a little idea of what I created. So here's the Newton's Cradle. I mean, this one's a little bit different from the project that I've just finished. I've actually put a bit more detail on this. But as you can see, it really does the job nicely. I've used Motion Boutique's Newton as well as the Connect Layers function. But actually, once I set it up, it was really just a matter of trial and error, and not for very long either. I would say, to sort of get to that point was probably a good few hours of work. But now I've got it set up, I kind of know how to do that, and hopefully will come in use in the future. Anyway, let's jump into After Effects. So here we are within the actual After Effects project of the Newton's Cradle setup. So I think before we actually recreate this, it's a nice idea just to show you what it is you're going to be creating, so you know what you're aiming for. So we start with a composition called New Setup, and within this composition we have all of the ellipses. We have the pivot points that each ellipse is attached to, and we also have the main action ball. So if I just come to ellipse 1, we can see ellipse 1 selected in our composition, and then the little dot above it, so that sits just outside of our comp, and that is the pivot point from which our ellipse 1 will swing from. So we have all the other ellipses within here, and then our main action ball. So the main action ball is currently sitting outside of our comp, and that's because we have some keyframes set on the dot above it. So our main action ball is parented to the dot above, and so when our dot sort of rotates into scene, we can see the main action ball coming into scene, coming to frame 12, it rests at frame 12, and this is basically where Newton will take over, and Newton will generate the rest of the keyframes for us. To get an idea of that, if I jump into the final output comp, so this is the final output, this is everything with our background and lighting in, but what we can see is on our ellipses, so the main action ball and all the consecutive ellipses, we now have keyframes generated for us. So this is everything that Newton has generated. So just really giving you a very quick snippet of what it is that we'll be creating over the next half hour or so. Okay, so just create yourself an HD composition for now. It doesn't really matter whether you're doing it 25 frames a second or 29.97 frames, but we'll just create a HD size comp, and then from here we're going to create our first ellipse. So we go to the shape layer, and we want a nice size shape layer, and I'm going to create an ellipse. So give it an ellipse path and a white fill. So let's create a white film there. Probably could do being a little bit bigger, so something around that size. So our first ellipse, so we'll name the shape layer ellipse so we know what it is. And then from the shape layer we're going to create the dot that sits at the top of the composition. So let's name that dot. We'll give it a different colour, so let's stick with the green that we had before. But actually this one can be a lot smaller. So move that, make it quite small, and then go into your position keyframe, move that up and out of the comp. So it only needs to be out of the comp ever so slightly. We're also going to start off with our ellipses parented to the dot layer. So just parent them both together. This will help when we come to align things, but we will eventually unparent most of these when we come to jumping into Newton. So I'm going to move that first, move these over, so they both need to be selected, so you're moving them at, of course, we're just going to move the dot, my fault, so we're just moving the dot, moving that over to the left of screen, and then just keep repeating, so we duplicate, move them, the duplications to the top of the stack, and then with the dot selected then we're going to move that over to the right slightly. And hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. So again, move it to the top of the stack, go to your position keyframes. So with dot 3 we're going to move that over again slightly to the right. So we're starting to fill up the screen. So the shortcut I use to move them to the top of the stack is the Apple key and the right bracket. Being careful not to ruin the alignment between each consecutive dot and its ellipse. So we've got 6 there, so let's go for one more. I have 7 dots on screen. And just change again the position of this dot. And there we go, so we've got 7 ellipses. So now what we want to do is, obviously I've been doing that by eye, so the distance between each of these ellipses is not going to be the same. So if you select the first, or just any of the dots really, and then go to the select label group, so just click on the colour and then select label group, so that's going to select all of the dots for us. Then in the align palette, and let's just bring that over. So we'll need to just distribute the dots evenly. So we come down to this option called horizontal center distribution. And if you click on that, it's then going to realign all of those dots for us. So the spacing between each of these ellipses is pretty much equal now. And then let's just move them all so they are a little more center of screen. So we can sort of see that the center of our composition is now pretty much in the center of that ellipse. And then select all, and let's just close all of those. And the next thing we can do is unparent. So we don't need our ellipses parented to those dots anymore. We will parent the main action ball in a second, but we're going to unparent the rest. So the action ball is actually the first ellipse that we see. What I'm going to do though is move that just to the top of the stack. And let's give that a different colour, and then we can also call it main action ball, just so we know which layer it is. And so this is now going to be parented to the dot that sits above it. So with the dot we open up the rotation keyframe, and our first rotation keyframe is going to be set to 90 degrees. So that then takes our main action ball out of the scene. We place a keyframe, and actually let me just change that because it seems to have just gone to the 2 frames. And there we go. And then we were going to move the timeline along to 12 frames, and then just come back to 0 degrees. So you notice that I'm not even having to touch, so I'm not having to swing it past. We're just going to stop at 0. And so that is pretty much it in terms of setting it up ready to go into Newton now. So good idea to save our projects, and then when we're ready we're going to go to Composition and Newton, and I believe that this is going to work on all versions of Newton. I've got Newton 2, and then OK that. So here we are ready to start our action in Newton. So here we are within Newton, and you can see the ellipses and the dots have all come in as we hoped they would, and they've even kept the same label colouring within Newton, which is handy, so it just makes it easier to see what we're doing. So the first thing to note, if I just press play in Newton now, everything drops out of scene, and the reason that's happening is we have our gravity set up. And that's just the default. It always opens with the magnitude set to 10 and the direction is pointing downwards, which just means that as soon as we press play, anything we've done in that scene before we've attached any other settings to it are just going to fall out of the scene. So what I can do is actually turn the magnitude down to 0, which basically means we don't have any gravity in that scene now. So pressing play just means nothing is going to happen. So I'm going to keep it set to that. Now the next thing that I need to do is actually join the ellipses, so each of our ellipses to the dots above. So it's each ellipse to its own dot. And the way that we do that is apply a distance joint. So I'm going to go through each of these. So we select ellipse 2 and dot 2 and we go to joint, and then we come up to the top left button, which is called a distance joint, and we add that. And then hopefully you can see within the scene that this yellow guide has appeared between the top dot and the ellipse. And so we need to do that for each of the ellipses and dots that are paired up, creating a distance joint between them both. So trying to do this relatively quickly. And the same goes for the main action ball and the dots. So again, they will have a distance joint too. And so now each of those ellipses are attached to the dots above. And just one more thing before we even start playing with the movement is each of these dots will not be doing anything other than just staying in its position and basically being the attachment of the, let's call it invisible string for now, to the ellipse. So I'm going to select each of the dots and even the top dot, and top left of, or in our body properties dialog box under general, we can now set all of these dots to static, and that just means that whatever we do in Newton, those dots are not going to move, so they're going to stay in position. And so now we're pretty much set to start playing with movement within Newton. I'm going to take that into the next scene. So from here we're now ready to start playing around with some of the settings that are going to help the main action ball trigger action amongst the rest of the ellipses. Okay, so what we need to do now is set the all of the ellipses in the scene to the AE-matic setting. So we are going to select each one of the ellipses, and then coming up to the general settings, let's switch it all to AE-matic. So it basically looks within After Effects to see what keyframes are set within After Effects. So Newton will let those keyframes happen, and as we know, the first main action ball is set to sort of rest at 12 frames. So we know it drops in, and we can see it here from outside of the scene down to 0 degrees, and then after that keyframe, Newton will take over the work. So all of these are set to AE-matic. We keep the density set to 0, the friction was to 1, sorry, friction at 1, and bounciness at 1. And then let's just change a few settings here. So velocity magnitude, I'm going to take that down to 0, the same here to 0. Angular velocity, will keep that set to 5, and actually I think the rest of these are pretty much set to go. And then the other thing that I just want to make sure of, so in the time divider, so usually that's going to be set to 1, I think, is the general setting. Let's just see what happens. So we're going to press play, and hopefully we'll start seeing some movement. So now the balls are basically all connected, and there we go. So it's triggering that movement through the scene. Now, things like AE tension, I've taken that pretty much all the way down. Not all the way actually, just slightly near to sort of 0. Let's just take that up so you can see what happens. So if I take that, say, to 1, and it's going to start again. Okay, so as we move that up and keep moving it, and you'll see that the moment that we get to 3, the tension is actually it's quite full on there, so it's really trying to respect that keyframe. Okay, so it rests here and it stops. Whereas if we take it all the way down, I'm going to just take it all the way now. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so it's moving, but it's super slow. Okay, so we're going in super slow motion. So we'll eventually get there, but hey, we don't have time to wait for that. So I had it set to about 0.1, and that felt like a nice setting to me. It's not going, you know, too fast and furious. If it's too fast, because of the density, the balls are going to be really kind of knocking out of the scene, and it's not really what we're after. And with the time divider, we can play around with this to maybe try and quicken up the pace of things a bit. So if we take that to, say, 0.3, now we can see that we've actually sped up the scene. So just by reducing the figure or the number there, that's going to make the movement in the scene a bit quicker. Okay. What you'll also see as it's moving, and you can see actually the balls are coming to a rest now, we've also got the counter going on here, so already at sort of 550 odd frames, so we won't be generating that many, but you can see you can just let this keep running and it will just keep generating movement if there's movement to be had. So I'm going to just rewind. Let's just play that through again, see if we're happy with it. Okay, so let's just stop it somewhere around there. We'll probably just render out, say, 200 frames just for our purposes. So we come into the end frame option, so under the export dialog box, end frame, we can type in 200 there. Now obviously, you know, I'm kind of just trying to quicken up this tutorial so you can see what I've done or how I created this. But I would encourage you to have a play around with the settings within Newton. Sometimes it is just a bit of trial and error to try and get the look and effect that you want. Once you're happy with that, then we press render, and it's going to play that scene again, and you can see our render bar sliding across the screen there. And then Newton basically closes down and we jump back into After Effects. So once Newton's closed down, we automatically go back into After Effects, and you'll notice, especially if you haven't used Newton before, it just goes straight back to your original composition, so our setup. However, if we go to our project window, you can see in my tutorial folder there's a new comp called Setup 2. So if I double click on that, we should be seeing, let's just scrub through here, there we go, so there's our movement, and I'm going to see that that kind of keeps going until we know we've generated 200 frames. So if I open up and just select all, open up the layers, there we go, so we can see our keyframes have been generated for us. So the first thing I do is I come back to my composition setup, and I just say, call it MB, so we know that's Motion Boutique, so I know that that is my kind of final setup file. Making sure I'm back in there. There we go. And so the next thing for us to do would be to connect the strings to from the dots to the ellipse. So what we're looking for now is our connect layers file. So we come to our window menu, connect layers, and here we go. So what we're looking to do is just create rope between the dot and the ellipse. So it's pretty much what we did earlier on. So we select both of the ones that we want to join, and we hit rope, and then release the caps. And what we can see is at the top of our composition now is a layer called rope. So that's the first two. So we need to go through each one of these individually. Ellipse 4, press rope, and 5. And this is where you can see the importance of naming and you know, possibly even numbering your layers if you need to. And rope there we go. So all the ropes are sitting at the top of our layers. I can close down the connect windows layer, and then let's just play that through. There we go. So now we've got rope connected from the dots to the ellipses. So that's pretty much creating the Newton's Cradle, and then in the next section I'll just show you how I finessed the final output scene by adding a background and creating a light. So to finesse this final scene, we'll create a background first, so just create a background colour of your choosing. So let's go with blue, something like that. We're going to move that to the bottom of the layers palette. All of these layers are going to be in 3D, set to 3D. So why don't we do that now? So we'll select all of them, select our 3D option. And what we want to do is actually just push that background into the Z space a little more. So if I go to my position keyframes, I'm going to move that back. Doesn't need to go back too far, just a little bit. But what we can see now is obviously the layer is, as it's moving back, we can see the edges of the comp. So the best thing to do here is just rescale up that layer. You can make it as big as you want here, it doesn't really matter. So that's our background layer. And just for good practice, let's just call that background. Okay, and then let's place a light in here. So we're going to go to new light, just have it a point light, and okay, so we can see now we're getting the vignette that we had in our original showing. So at the moment our light is projecting, but our layers aren't set to accept the light or cast shadows. So we need to do that first. So let's just make sure. So if we go to background, go into the material options, we want to make sure that yes, it's accepting the light and accepting shadows, so they're all on. We don't need our background layer to cast a shadow, so that's fine. So now we're looking basically the ellipse and the rope. We're not really concerned about the dots at the top because we don't see them. But if I come down into the ellipse now, and we'll go to the first one that we're seeing, we definitely do want it to cast a shadow, so we place that on, and then as well we do want it to accept the light, I think. In fact, it's quite nice. Let's actually have that turned off, so we're not going to accept light. So actually, just to create the depth, all we want it to do is cast a shadow. So let's just come back to the light first. So let's move that to the top so it's a bit easier to access. And then under light options, then what we want to do is cast shadow. Okay, so once we actually have that on, then we can see the shadow behind the ellipse. It's obviously very dark at the moment, so we know that we can take that darkness down, so just a tad. And we can also diffuse it, so we can make it quite a soft shadow, which is also quite nice. So I'll keep it a little bit more pronounced for this tutorial so you can see what's happening. So I'm quite happy with those settings. The one thing I'm noticing is that the rope at the moment is sitting above the ellipses, which we don't want. So we're going to move those ropes down underneath the ellipses. So now it looks like the ropes are just attached at the top. And then quite easy, so we're going to just click on the material options and then copy that, so just Apple C or Control C on a PC, and then select the rest of the ellipses, even including the main ball, and then Apple V and paste. So very quickly we're just creating the shadows across the rest of the ellipses. And so now we've pretty much completed the file. So if we play that through, and actually let's just turn off our title safe, and now playing that through, we can see a little bit slowly, obviously we're playing it at half res, but there's still a bit of action going on. There we go. So that's starting to look like the final project. One thing that I would suggest is obviously when you've got files where there's lots of movement going on, it's probably a good idea to have the motion blur set in the project. So if I just come to somewhere around here, say, and let's just turn, so we turn on motion blur at the top of our composition, but also we need to turn on motion blur on all of our objects. So just underneath the little motion blur tab in the composition settings and turn that on. And so you can see without even playing through, if I just turn that off and on, you can see the difference. So now we've got some motion blur set within the composition. Okay, so the next thing to do would be to find the last frame, set your render area, and then render your Newton's Cradle out to whatever format you like. I tend to render things to MP4, and that way you can upload those up onto online, or send them over to clients for previewing. So I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. I've tried to keep it as short and succinct as possible. Let me know what you thought of it. It'd be great to see your projects as well. So if you managed to create a Newton's Cradle or something similar using the techniques that I've been showing you, it'd be fantastic to see it. Okay, thanks very much everyone, and yeah, enjoy the tutorial.